Hi, welcome to a new episode of Engineering Rebuilt.
Do you think you know a lot about construction?
Maybe we can provide a fresh perspective.
This is a podcast where we rebuild preconceptions of engineering,
Reclaim the narrative,
and share the voices of women from across the construction industry. Why not join us?
Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Engineering Rebuilt podcast. I'm your host Yvonne and together with Lina Soderberg, we will be joined today by the brilliant and amazing Olivia Perkins. Olivia, why don't you tell us something about yourself?
Gosh, okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. So yes, I'm Olivia Perkins. I'm a civil engineer by trade. I always like to put it that way. So I have been in the industry for getting on for 15 years now. I studied civil engineering at Loughborough University. My path into engineering was not overly planned. It just seemed like a good thing to do at that point in time. I think if I've thought about it a little bit more, perhaps I would have chosen a different path. Well, I say that now, but actually now I really enjoy this industry. In terms of projects I've worked on Crossrail and High Speed 2, and one of my more recent projects was a project in Luton called the Luton Dart, connecting the train station to the airport, which was a really good and diverse engineering project. In terms of my career, I have mixed it up a little bit. I've worked throughout the project life cycle, but I've also taken time out of being a civil engineer. I worked in my corporate strategy team of my previous business, looking at business projects about how we could do things better. At the time, things like Brexit, workforce planning, marketing, and doing things like that and making a career in this industry, bringing it with it lots of variety is been a real joy, I think, as part of my career so far, the fact that I've mixed things up a little bit. So these days I'm now an area director responsible for a number of projects. So once again, sort of trying sort of a different aspect of the industry. That's me in a nutshell, I think.
Amazing. That's really, really cool. I think it sounds like you've worked on some of the really big infrastructure projects that are happening at the moment, and a lot of exciting infrastructure projects as well. How come that's what you've been interested in, or what you've chosen to focus on in the industry? By accident or by choice? And what do you like about it?
Initially, it was by accident, and then I guess more so it's then become by choice. But actually, I've come away from that a little bit at the moment. When I was studying at university, I did work placements, as many work placements as I could get myself into. One, to help pay for university, but two, also to just give me a taste of the industry. And it's something I'd recommend to anyone who's studying civil engineering, is to make sure you get your work placements. But where I'm going with that is actually my work placements were mainly in construction and building. And the one thing that taught me was actually I didn't really like building very much. And when I graduated, it was during the recession, and luckily, I guess that's the way to put it. Essentially, they couldn't take me at that period of time. Ordinarily, I would have gone straight back to work for that business, but there wasn't the opportunity, and our infrastructure business of the business I was in had an opportunity, and I went for it. And just by chance, they placed me on the Crossrail tenders at that point in time. And from there on in, I went into the Crossrail project and never looked back. It was a fantastic experience.
It's funny that how often things happen like by accident more than by choice. I think I figured out I wanted to be an engineer and then looked at all the Wikipedia pages about different types of engineering and then kind of picked one by chance. And then when I got to university, realised that maybe it wasn't the right one and ended up slightly like changing paths towards civil engineering from where I'd started. But yeah, that's kind of why I added that in, because it seems like you ask people why they chose what they do, and a lot of them didn't choose it in the first place. They just kind of, it happens the way it happens, doesn't it, Yvonne? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When I left university, I didn't even know there was a difference between consultants and contractors. I went to the Royal Military College of Science. So I was at college with 3,000 guys from the military and 20 civilians, effectively. It was a really interesting kind of collaboration between Cranfield University and the military, but it gave a very, very different view of what construction was about. I mean, we learned a lot about emergency engineering and about explosives engineering and stuff like that. So when I talk about joining the industry in the recession, Olivia, I joined the industry in the recession in the 90s, the beginning of the 90s. We always seem to be in recession. And I wrote 150 applications to just about any business that had construction-related topics, from everything from sort of water industry right the way through. And when I landed a place with Molam, as they were then, on the M25, I had no idea what a site engineer did. I literally turned up on day one and I had no idea what the role was. And actually found I loved it, which was really, really bizarre because it could have gone so horribly wrong from the position I was in. I did no work placements because I worked at the college during the holidays because it gave me an opportunity to earn a bit more money and pay my bills and live on a subsidised rate on the base. So it was a much easier route in. But it meant I was totally unprepared for the industry I joined. But I'm still here 28 years on, so it can't have gone so badly.
I agree with you. It's at school, my A-levels were maths and physics, so that's the engineering bit, but I had history and psychology, and history was my passion, and I really wanted to do that, but I realised, I can't really do a career with history. I don't know, what do you do with history? It's more of an interest, and it was a careers teacher who said if you thought about engineering, and it was kind of, oh yeah, that would do, without much thought, and ended up, as you say, kind of falling into it. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we talk about it so much, don't we? But there's such a lack of visibility of what engineers do. Yes, there's a few small television programs, but they don't really get into the crux of what an engineer does. Everyone knows what a doctor does, a lawyer does, a policeman does, because there's TV series galore giving you insight to that. But you don't get that with this industry. We're fortunate as a collective that actually we found that we enjoy this industry, but unfortunately there are some people who come into it and realise actually it's not for them, and it's how do we get kind of that awareness out a little bit more, I think is one of the big challenges.
What do civil engineers do, Olivia, then?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? As you say, kind of between working as a contractor and consultant, that can be a very different answer. And even between contractors and different projects, that answer is so different because it calls for so many different kind of skills, I think, between those different elements. But as a civil engineer, for me, very crudely, when I started, it was all about setting out, planning works, developing solutions. Again, I was quite fortunate in terms of the opportunities that I was given, that I worked with the project director on our project on Crossrail to find value engineering solutions to actually build things more efficiently and safely, and making essentially our temporary works more efficient. And so really got into the crux of actually how do we build the best value project for our client safely, economically, sustainably, which is really, for me, what I think engineering is all about, trying to find kind of the best value solutions. Again, kind of giving tangible examples of that is quite a challenge until you're in a specific project and you can see what the challenges are, and also whether our clients, consultants, what have you, want to join that journey also. One of the biggest things I think we have about working in the industry and being an engineer is actually the technical bit's only half of the challenge. The social bit, behaviour bit, the bringing everyone along the same journey is the other half of the challenge. It's all about the team and the people and how you get everyone, as I say, pulling in the same direction. And that's what you don't necessarily get taught at university, those people skills.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot about like the technical objective things that can just be like right or wrong, whereas then you get out into the industry and there's so many versions and so many people and so many like different parameters to balance that it's hard to find something that's without a shadow of a doubt the absolute best way to approach something and to have everybody on the same page at the same time.
And the trouble is, that best way bit is subjective. As much as we all think that engineering gives you a single best solution, actually there's it's subjective. People will have different views on what best value, best opportunity means. My personal kind of approach to that is I always think, especially with infrastructure projects, we're building these for the public, often taxpayers' money. That doesn't mean build the cheapest solution right here, right now, but it's actually what's the best solution kind of that will meet the public's needs for the period of time of that project. And also for the people working on it, yeah, as I said, safer, sustainable, all those kind of good things. But yeah, what drives people opinions on that is very different. And again, that's part of the challenge, getting to the root of what's driving all of these different individuals to, as I say, get them along on a singular journey.
No, I was just going to say that actually that's part of the reason why we need diverse teams. I know I keep harping back to this, and Lina's heard this before, but if there is no single solution, the best solution is the one that's created by the most diverse group of people, because they all bring not necessarily diverse in terms of any particular kind of attribute, but the greater diversity of understanding of engineering, the different types of engineering, the different backgrounds of people, all of those things bring different perspectives on solutions, and that in itself creates a better solution, a better overarching solution, because everybody can, their viewpoints can be considered.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's so many examples, aren't there, not just in engineering, in science and other streams that have not considered diversity in their research or solution. And unfortunately, it's just meant that essentially the output has been directed to a very singular group of people, which is not what we need. So, as you say, it's all about having diverse teams will help influence that. It is, I kind of always refer to construction as a team sport. You cannot build these projects on your own. It is a team sport. You need to have that group of people together. And as you say, Yvonne, but having a diverse group makes that even better. It makes it a much richer experience, and the output from that will be hopefully the best possible solution.
How do we get a wider range of people into the industry?
Gosh, the amount of times I've been asked. If I could answer that question, I probably wouldn't be here today. I'd be sort of unknown. We wouldn't have this problem necessarily. How do we get more people in? I go back to the sort of one, as I've talked about earlier, visibility is one piece, making people aware of the industry, what we do. And I know that there's so many industry bodies that are trying to work in that space. I'm sure that all of us have been in schools at some point in time doing talks to children to kind of make them more aware of the industry. So one bit is just, as hard as we can, just increase the visibility of the industry and what we do, and push the piece about we're an industry that makes a difference. I think that gets lost quite a lot of the time. I don't hesitate to say, actually, our industry doesn't have the best image. In fact, I'd say it's got a bit of an image problem. It's often beset by projects that run over budget, run over time, and unfortunately that's the stuff that gets spread across the media. It's not necessarily sold as an industry that actually, if it wasn't for infrastructure especially, and construction too, we wouldn't have homes, we wouldn't have water, we wouldn't have power. It is the industry that essentially makes our lives function, and the more we get that message out about making a difference, I think that in itself attracts a greater level of diversity. I think the younger generations especially are more driven by kind of purpose as much by money or anything like that. There's no silver bullet, I think, to increasing diversity. I think it's as I say, just trying to improve our message and our image. And then there's this circular piece, isn't there, that the more diversity we get into the industry, that in itself should breed greater diversity. It's the chicken and the egg. How do you get that bit in the first place?
Yeah, because the first problem is getting people in, and then the second problem is getting them to stay. But before that, what you said made me think of how bad we are at self-promotion in the industry, or talking about the good things that we do. I was on a site visit recently where another civil engineer said that if you look up the definition of boring in the dictionary, then the answer you get is a civil engineer. It's just ridiculous, because it's like you go to these sites that you actually, like, if you have the chance to see what we do on our construction sites, and I have a construction bias because that's where I've spent most of my time, infrastructure bias, because that's where I spent most of my time. But if you go in and you look at the things that we're doing, it's so cool. Like tunnel boring machines, so cool. Bridges, so cool. Big bridge lifts, like all these things is so impressive, and we just don't seem to be able to tell anybody about it or get anybody else excited about it. But it just seems like such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. On my last project at Luton, we drove a bridge down a road and put it in over a weekend. Like, how cool is that? But again, you don't get that message out. All people knew in Luton was, the road up to the airport shut for the weekend. How annoying. And we needed to do better in terms of, there was actually quite a lot of good kind of media that went out about it, but we could do a lot better. But we must consider also that, not every project is a bridge, a tunnel. There's a lot of infrastructure that's actually smaller and fiddly. Needless to say, it equivalently makes such a massive difference, but it depends what your interest is in. And again, it's just that range of opportunities that are available that are in the industry that we could do better with creating awareness of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem that we have is that, we don't sell ourselves very well. But, I mean, that's probably because the people doing the marketing all have quite a older view of this, maybe. I don't want to. If we look at the institutions, a lot of the institutions that represent civil engineering are led by quite a esteemed set of representatives of our industry, and perhaps they don't remember the excitement of being on the ground, the excitement of doing the stuff that we do. I mean, some of the stuff that Lina's talking about, bridge works and things like that, those projects really spark in imagination and enthusiasm in young people. Do utilities spark imagination and enthusiasm? Possibly not, but do they care about the speed of their broadband? And are we responsible for the speed of their broadband? Absolutely, we are. And those things, it's about repackaging and reselling what we do so that we draw people in by giving them the highlights. I mean, yeah, the industry does dig holes in the ground. Hell, we dig holes in the ground. I dug some really big holes in the ground. I was there when we did Cutty Sark Box a long time ago for Dockland Light Railway Extension. Those kind of projects still happen every day. High Speed 2 is going to create a load more of those opportunities where we can show just how cool the industry is, and the number and diversity of roles within the industry, that just about anybody can join the industry doing just about anything and find a place within the industry. And I think that's the most interesting thing. You don't have to be an engineer to join the industry. You can be a geography graduate or an ecology graduate or an environmental scientist, and you can still find a space. You could probably be a historian, to be fair. You still find a place within the industry where you fit. And I think the more we make it clear to people that there is that diversity, it's not just about being an engineer and building things, but there's all of that diverse team that goes with that, then the easier it is to bring more people into the industry. I mean, I'm not a typical engineer. I wanted to be a doctor. I fell into engineering by mistake because I failed my A-levels. Hey, okay, guys, I admit it. So I shoved a pin in the paper. I mean, a D and two Cs was not where I was supposed to be going when I was estimated an A and two Bs. But yeah, I mean, that's the way the world works. But it meant that I looked at a subject that I would never have looked at before. And when I looked at it, I realised that actually it was just exactly what I wanted. And that was exactly where I fitted, and I still fit, and I still love the industry today. And that's, I mean, there's not many people that stay in an industry for 30 years and are still loving it at the end of 30 years. But in the construction industry, that's quite common. So we must be doing something right.
You're definitely right there. Most people stay in the industry for life, don't they? Although you made a slight point earlier, Lina, about kind of retention. And that is one of the big challenges, going back to the diversity piece, is sort of the people who stay in the industry are the traditional lists, if I put it that way. The people we lose out of the industry are the ones that we're wanting to retain, because the industry doesn't work for them anymore in terms of how it functions, the working hours, the working practices. And so going back once again to your question about kind of what can the industry do, that we need to think a little bit more fundamentally about the way we work and make it more accessible, I guess, for people from all backgrounds, and not bias people's opportunities as a result if it's not accessible. So that makes sense. And perhaps being a little bit vague with my question, my response there.
No, I completely agree. And I think it's really hard because I think you only know your own experience or what other people tell you of their experience. And sometimes I feel like we cater the whole environment to the majority or the average. And what we need to do is actually tailor it to the people who we want in rather than the people that we've already got. And hard to do that. But I guess so my question would be, what are a couple things you think we could do differently that would make it better or that would keep more of those people in that we're struggling to retain?
So there's a couple of very kind of basic things, and some of those have happened almost in the last couple of years off the back of COVID in terms of agile working, allowing people to work remotely, embracing and trusting our staff to work remotely in certain roles. So yeah, policies around adaptable working, family-friendly policies also. I know most of the major tier 1 companies have thoroughly kind of soul-searched and rewritten their family-friendly policies around maternity, paternity, and all other elements around those kind of facts of life to do with sort of miscarriage and adoption. I know that those kind of things are coming into that space. But for me, there's a more fundamental issue in how we procure projects in this country doesn't necessarily then promote the best way of delivering projects in the future. Sort of the highly competitive nature of how we procure projects, high risk, low margins. Although we talk sort of going into the sort of specifics a little bit in terms of how projects are awarded, there's a high place put on technical questions to make sure that they're receiving the best solution, but in reality the commercial factor, even if it's a small percentage of the bid, still can quite largely largely influence essentially the award of the project. And where I'm getting to with this is essentially we're signing up to try and deliver jobs in ways that in reality, once we get to it, aren't necessarily the most practical. Sort of need, especially with infrastructure projects, 24/7 working in remote locations, not considering how we set up projects in the best way to make them accessible. I don't have a single answer for that, but for example, when I was working, I did a short stint working in France, and what I found really interesting was they were doing a tunnelling project in the centre of Paris, and every Friday they turned off the TBM and they restarted it every Monday. And you wouldn't do that in this country because people think you need to do it 24/7 because that's the best way. But actually, there are other ways of delivering major infrastructure projects that address kind of making sure, again, it's they're not driving everyone to despair or causing issues around fatigue. So I haven't got a strict answer in terms of the procurement piece, how to do that better. It's not working, is it, in terms of the fact that we're needing to, the procurement approach doesn't necessarily deliver best solutions. It delivers kind of people who are willing to commit to kind of the hardest and fastest terms at that point in time, which will then put pressure on the teams trying to deliver them. And then once you put the pressure on those teams, that's when you're impacting the ability for all those people working on those teams to work on it and deliver it in a way that's accessible.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I think that's a really interesting perspective to think, okay, actually maybe we need to take a step back and rethink things from a bigger perspective than like individual small changes that we can make. I also think it's interesting because what you're describing is we're going for, I don't know if I'm going to say this in the right way, but we're going for the fastest, most intense, most intense way of achieving something. But then in the process, we're ending up with this massive skills shortage, and we can't get the people to fill the roles to do it that fastest, most intense way. So is it actually not even thinking about the whole diversity and inclusion piece? But if we can't get people to fill the roles to deliver in that way, then are we setting just completely unrealistic expectations maybe in the first place? I don't know if that's an extreme way of looking at it, but fundamentally, we need people to do the work, so it needs to be procured and delivered in a way where you can get people to do those jobs.
And we call it efficiency. I mean, that's what the industry calls it, an efficient solution. But actually what an efficient solution is one that eats up humans. I mean, a program efficient solution isn't a solution that thinks about the well-being of staff. A program efficient solution is one that delivers the project in the fastest time for the least money. And that isn't the right solution for the workforce delivering it. It probably isn't the right solution for the people living around the project either. I mean, if you said to everybody, okay, actually your kids are going to be able to sleep at the weekend because we're not going to make any noise at all. Forget noise limits of 67 decibels and we won't go above that at 10 o'clock at night. But actually saying we respect the neighbourhood and we're not going to do those works at night. We're not going to do those works at the weekend. We are going to think about the well-being of our staff and the communities we work in. The solutions we created would be different to the solutions that are currently created. At the moment, the solutions that are created focus on the money that is spent by clients and the program that we deliver, and not on the communities that we work within or the people that deliver the projects.
So I think that's a good opportunity to ask. We have one question that we ask every time we do the podcast, and it is, what would you like to see different in the industry in 5 years' time?
Because I was listening to the other podcast, so I had to think about this one, but so it sounds a bit facetious, but I'd like to not be talking about diversity anymore. That would be the great place to get to, in that actually we've got to a normal position where it's not a topic. Because throughout my career, I've been asked, what's it like being a woman engineer? Not what's it like being an engineer. What's it like being a woman engineer? It's okay, so I enjoy it. It'd be nice not to have to talk about it anymore, that essentially we've achieved diversity in a sense. I don't think we'll ever get to a place where we're 50-50 or fully representative of society, but essentially to be in a much better place. And for me, it's sort of the diversity is kind of the outcome. It's about the inclusive behaviours. How do we get to a point that our behaviours are a lot more with the 21st century, and that we treat everyone equally with respect? We take on board the ideas of all the people in the room. For me, part of the challenges with inclusive behaviours is actually getting people to acknowledge kind of all the voices that are in a meeting. There's a lot of unconscious bias in not doing that, and how do we get that improved to make sure that, yes, we're not having to talk about this anymore. And going back to the procurement piece, I think, it would be nice to see the industry looking at ways to bring these projects into being in a better place that, again, means that we're not having to talk about diversity in the same way. So going back to your point earlier, about the kind of skill shortages, I genuinely think we are approaching, if not at the cliff edge of a serious issue, where we've got these major projects coming to market right now, but we do not have the people to deliver them. And the challenges that we've got with material inflation, labour inflation, all that kind of stuff, is not just because of what's happened within the wider worldwide landscape. It's because there aren't the people who want to come and deliver these projects necessarily anymore, or just the quantum and what have you. And so we need to think about how we bring these projects to market better to make the industry a better place and more diverse place.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yvonne, do you have any final points?
No, I mean that's the solution, isn't it? I mean, if we've got a skill shortage and we're only using half the population, or only drawing from half the population generally, then it's fairly obvious where the skill shortage could be addressed. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist, as we keep saying, to work out that actually there's a really simple solution to this. Women can lay bricks, women can drive tunnel boring machines, women can be engineers, women can be directors. Oh, hell, look, there's two of them on the call. Women can do anything that men can do, and do it just as well. And the time has come for people to stop saying that this is a man's job or a woman's job. There are no men's jobs. Just like clothes, there is no gender to careers. Careers can be anything people want them to be, and we need to get to a point where people realise that.
I think, I completely agree with that. I think another thing, so when I started working in the industry, I think it took over a year before I met a woman in an engineering position who was more senior than I was. Like somebody who was actually had been where I was before, who was ahead of me. And so, just being on this podcast and speaking to both you, Olivia, and Yvonne at the same time, and having conversations with women who are role models because they've done more and they've made it further and they haven't left. Like for me, that helps me stay in this industry. Thank you.
That seems like a great place to wrap up a really interesting conversation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Engineering Rebuilt. We hope you enjoyed being part of the conversation. Please join us next time to hear more diverse stories from people who are reclaiming their narrative to rebuild engineering.